Alright, you guys, this is your next Q&A, and like I always say, if I didn't get you on this one, I'll try to get you on the next one. Let's get straight to it. So Delta M wants to know, were any of the COs or institutions themselves ever held accountable for essentially sanctioning illegal fights, gambling rings during the gladiator fights? Was there ever any kind of class action lawsuit? That's cruel and unusual in punishment. Or were they widely known to have happened, and I can't see how the state and feds could totally look the other way forever. As a matter of fact, the administration in Corcoran that was responsible for staging the gladiator fights not only got hit with civil lawsuits, but they also got hit with criminal charges as well. In fact, it was actually two COs that were credited with exposing the scandal, Richard Caruso and Steve Riggs. Between 1989 and 1994, 7 inmates were fatally shot by guards who were employed at Corcoran as gunners. Although they probably could have prosecuted these guards for any one of the 7 inmates who were fatally shot, the Preston Tate shooting that took place on April 2nd, 1994 was considered the most egregious that constituted criminal charges. Tate was shot in the head by Correctional Officer Christopher Bethea. Shoe inmate Anthony James, a key prosecution witness, testified that Bethea bragged moments before the fight broke out that it was duck hunting season. We as inmates were doing what we do. It was all about trying to establish control of the yards, and the Corcoran shoe just provided a mechanism for us to dole out our political agendas. But from an administration standpoint, these guys were staging these fights for their own personal entertainment, and it was as corrupt as it can be. The gunners were loving it. For them, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. If you were a target, there was nowhere for you to get out of the line of fire. Fighting out there on these small pie-shaped concrete yards was brutal. And like I said when I spoke on this in one of my recent lives, it takes a certain type of individual to go out to these yards and continue to put your life on the line every time they opened up the doors. I believe there was a total of 8 correctional officers that were indicted as a result of this scandal. There were thousands of staged fights that took place in Corcoran between 1989 and 1994, but the criminal case focused on 84 fights that took place during the shift that these 8 officers worked. It illustrated a pattern and clearly showed that they were some of the main catalysts that were orchestrating and promoting this. The prosecution focused on 2 of the fights. Corcoran Sergeant Truman Jennings and guards Timothy Dickerson, Michael Gibson, and Raul Tavares were charged for staging a tag team fight that involved 3 inmates on February 23, 1994. Lieutenant Douglas Martin, Sergeant John Vaughn, and guards Jerry Visu and Christopher Bethea were charged with setting up the brawl that ended in Preston Tate's death. The defense attorneys successfully deployed the Nuremberg defense, maintaining throughout the 9-week trial that these officers didn't set up any fights and were merely doing their jobs. They ultimately blamed the violence on an ill-conceived integrated yard policy mandated by senior CDC officials designed to force prisoners from rival gangs to exercise together. The trial was a joke that ended with the full acquittal of all 8 officers indicted and a public lynching by the media of the officers that they called the 2 whistleblowers, Caruso and Riggs. So Raymond wants to know, when people refer to en soldado, is that like the former Nuestra Raza? Does an en soldado have more rank than just normal norteño? The rank or status associated with the title of an en soldado is the same as an NR member over just a northerner. Or with regards to the Mexican Mafia and its leadership structure, it's comparable to a camarada over a sureño. This is just another term used to describe NR members. So Juan Go wants to know, was there ever a time where you received a huila and you couldn't necessarily understand what the person was trying to tell you because they did a horrible job of writing or coding the huila? Absolutely, and it was at a critical time when it involved someone's status that was in question. This is why it used to be so important for us to practice on the legibility and neatness of our penmanship and in our ability to write mini writing. I've seen a lot of homeboys that had terrible penmanship, straight chicken scratch, that was hard to understand, but fortunately, it's never been that bad to where I couldn't make out what they were trying to convey. Now, when it comes to deciphering and using codes or other forms of covert communications, this is a whole different kind of animal. I came from an era where this was a lot more prevalent. Everybody's got cell phones now and other methods of facilitating communications, but using codes was something that required good penmanship and some artistic ability. Most of us are self-educated and self-taught. We've taken the time out to educate ourselves and to improve our own level of education. However, you'd be surprised how many of the older guys, some of which are part of leadership, can't read or write themselves. So Fast Ass Dave wants to know, do you feel the O pretty much fucked you by not telling you to stop all activities for a while after finding a tracking device on your car? That's like throwing you to the dogs, no? Of course, that's a no-brainer. I took all the obvious steps that I needed to in order to let them know that I was being surveilled and that me and my crew were under close scrutiny. Protocol itself should have allowed me and my crew to crawl up under a rock and stop everything. Under those circumstances, what could possibly justify anything else? What reason could there possibly be that would have justified keeping the regiment up and fully running under those type of detrimental circumstances? If I would have had to make a decision in a similar situation like that, and I would have had to weigh out the pros and cons between what's more important, i.e. whether or not to continue mandating a regiment to continue operating that's under intense law enforcement scrutiny, or to totally disregard this and require that regiment to continue generating money, the choice is an easy one. I would tell those brothers to shut it down and to cease all activity. For me to require them to continue on with business as normal would clearly be proof that there's only one thing that I care about, them continuing to keep the money coming, with a total and complete disregard for their well-being. That's exactly what happened in my situation. After I reported that me and my second in command had both found GPS tracking devices under our vehicles, and after I reported that I was dodging law enforcement because of a shooting I was involved in, the writing was on the wall. I knew then that all they cared about was the money. Us all getting wrapped up was placed on the back burner and became a secondary concern. But it's not like I just figured all this out late in the game. I came to understand that we're all expendable in this lifestyle. From the bottom of the pack to the top of the upper echelon, we're all expendable, and that's something that you just have to come to terms with. You can either let it discourage you to the point to where it'll eventually kill that internal fire that keeps you motivated, or you can just come to terms with it and accept it for what it is. That's what I did. I didn't let it spoil my resolve. I just kept doing what I was supposed to do and kept it pushing. So little guy wants to know, do you know Maikio Alvarez from Fresno? What's his story? Yeah, I know Maikio from Fresno. He stays in the cuts. You don't really hear his name out there too much because he doesn't put himself out there like that. We networked on a long distance tip when we were both out there years ago, but since then, he caught a case and has been doing federal time. One thing I can say about Maikio is that he's one of the ones who deserves credit for establishing somewhat of a positive rapport with Fresno in the federal system. I wouldn't go as far as saying that he's squarely responsible for it himself, but he was definitely instrumental in it, and I know that for a fact. So Cut It Out wants to know, as far as you know, who was the youngest made NF member? Second, how many Sureños you see jump sides like Lizard did? That's a good question. I know some C's that were barely hitting 20 when they were recruited, but I heard there were some back in the 70s and 80s that were 18 and 19. I was recruited when I was 24, but they've been pulled a lot younger than that. As far as Sureños crossing over like Lizard, honestly, he's the only one I've heard about that had a history behind him when he did it. I personally know a lot of guys who were born and raised from both either Northern or Southern California, and then ended up moving and converting years later when they got older. So Arrow 420 wants to know, how come you don't talk about your juvenile history too much? Like what happened in juvenile hall or the youth authority? Because this is a man's world, my boy. Juvenile war stories hardly even register on the Richter scale. Nah, seriously. I just don't see no point in talking about what I did when I was a kid. I mean, to each his own. It might appeal to some people, but I personally just don't see a whole lot of sense in talking about how I was mobbing around as an adolescent or bragging about how many other boys in the reformatory that I beat up. That's hardly worthy of a whole lot of recognition. It's comical. I'm not throwing no shade at anyone, but I get a kick out of this one character on YouTube that spends a considerable amount of time glorifying his juvenile history, but then slams the rest of us for talking about our prison histories when we were adults. He's one of those guys who tries to act like it's morally wrong to talk about prison politics if you moved out of the hood or if you're no longer part of that lifestyle. But then in that same breath, he'll glorify these adolescent war stories by talking about how tough he was and how he had these amazing hands. How he was a legendary juvenile gangster. You can't claim that your purpose on YouTube is to help people stay away from the gang element if you're not even willing to talk about it. I guess it's understandable if you didn't really do nothing worthy to talk about while you were in prison though either. On the other hand, I guess it might be helpful to other at-risk youth to talk about some of the choices you made as a kid, if in the sense of explaining when and where you went wrong and how you started down that wrong path. But anything beyond that is irrelevant. All my dirt and all the things that I did that really put my name out there on the streets happened during my adult life and while I was in prison. I didn't earn my bones in the youth authority or juvenile hall. If I did, I just wouldn't feel like they were all that worthy to talk about. So Luis Chen wants to know, what made you come out on YouTube and how did you hook up with Mundo from La Primera on the same channel? I honestly didn't want nothing to do with social media when I got indicted in this last case, and I looked at social media more as a detrimental way of possibly getting me the kind of exposure that I didn't want or need. Social media is nothing more than a huge social network that ties and connects everybody together. So originally, it wasn't something that I was even considering getting involved with, but I've always liked to watch YouTube as a form of my own entertainment, and that's what happened. For nothing more than entertainment, I started watching YouTube, and then I eventually started dropping comments. Some of my comments had political connotations that certain people started picking up on. The more comments I dropped, the more this one cat took notice. Eventually, he reached out and we started dialoguing back and forth. He said he could tell I had been to the joint, that I had been around, and he basically said he started picking up on things I had said that led him to believe that I had either been somebody or was somebody. After we filled each other out, he propositioned me about working with him and about collaborating on his channel, Loaded News Media. This guy was running about 4 or 5 channels. One of the other channels he had was called Perplexed News, the channel he was collaborating on with Mundo. Me and Mundo never been on the same channel together. We were on separate channels that were sister channels. I was on one channel and he was on another. Later on, I decided to branch off and create my own channel, Paradigm Media News. Then at another point, we started up a podcast and started working together again later on another channel called Shot Callers Podcast. Well, it was actually on Perplexed News, but that's what we called it. This channel would also end up falling apart, and we finally parted ways for good, and that's how all the magic started. So Robert G wants to know, do you still consider yourself a Norteño? A Norteño. I don't identify myself as a Norteño anymore. It has nothing to do with me being active or not. This is something I actually stopped doing when I became a member of the Nuestra Familia. It was at that time that I started to identify more with being an organized crime figure, and I got away from that whole gangbang mentality thing. I'm always going to have a connection to Northern California and the homeboys from Northern California. That's never going to change, whether I'm active or not. It's in my DNA, and it's been ingrained within me for so many years that it's not something that can just be wiped out or reprogrammed. Whenever you commit your life to a cause, and it's something you walked, talked, breathed, and ate, nothing's ever going to completely take that away. You can alter your thinking habits, change your goals, perspectives, and beliefs, but there's always going to be remnants and traces of that past life you lived. Like Al Pacino said in one of his famous movie quotes, you can be rehabilitated, reassimilated, reinvigorated, and reacclimated, but it'll never completely change who you are as a man. So the Martin 9400 wants to know, do you believe that prison genre channels that are disingenuous about their status or involvement in criminal organizations hurt the credibility of the genre as a whole? Or do they directly help drive traffic to legit channels such as yours because people always want that raw, uncut dope? Does anything ever happen to individuals that try to put informant jackets on someone like they did to Kung Fu? Also, Cusp RDR Nation wants to know, what do you think about some of these other channels in the prison genre who claim to have an interest in educating people, but then lie about who they were, what they did when they were active, and how they dropped out? Everybody seems to claim they were a leader. How is that possible? Also, what do you think about those who are clearly in it for the money? I'm going to combine my answer and knock out both of these questions since they're both along the same lines. I believe you get a little bit of both. Anytime you talk about something and you continue to hold consistent dialogue about it, it definitely brings more traffic and attention to it. That's common sense. But a lot of it is dependent on who it is that's talking and the delivery. Social media gives people a platform to spread their gospel, to talk about their interests, opinions, perspectives, and philosophy. And that's a good thing. But when this is used as a sounding board to spread misinformation, to spread rhetoric, or as a tool to grandstand, then I think it's a bad thing. I said it before and I'll say it again. If you don't know about something, don't talk about it and try to act like you do. When it comes to the prison genre and this whole idea of helping people or pitching it like you're in it to educate and prevent others from making some of the same mistakes you have, I think this is a huge ploy and a big misconception that's often used to cloak real intentions. The proof's in the content, and it's in stark contrast to the true underlying message. If you go back into some of these channels that are considered to be part of the prison genre, you'll see the change in their character and the change in purpose by just using a keen eye and by just listening to the message. Go to the first couple of videos and then go to where they're at now. First, it starts out with just wanting to help people, to deliver the message, and to help people digress and deviate from the lifestyle. In the beginning, there's a level of genuine honesty, in some cases too much honesty, but it can't be undone or unsaid. This is what exposes you later. But there's a real honesty, and there's even some genuine interest in helping people. They tell their story, they talk about how the politics have betrayed them, and how the whole cause is nothing but a huge scam, a smokescreen that continues to be generated and ingrained with calculated propaganda. But then the message begins to change. Now it's no longer about helping other people, it's all about helping yourself and restoring your image. This is where most of these channels that are part of the prison genre reveal their deception. Is it really about helping people, or is it about trying to look a certain way and trying to be perceived as someone who's still promoting some of the implications of a stand-up kind of guy? If you're really in it to educate people and to help them understand all the detriments that are involved in that lifestyle, then why does it become necessary to invoke the misrepresentations and gloss over the truth? What I mean by that is this. I've been doing this YouTube thing for almost 5 years now. Back when I was with Loaded News, before I branched off and created my own channel. And I've seen dozens of new channels in the prison genre make their debut. I watched how they started, and then I watched as the channel transformed into a deceptive, self-serving financial grab. First, it was about helping people. Then it was about preservation of self-image. And finally, it led to nothing more than a way to make money. And there's no shame or compunction about it either. The interest in spreading a good message is no longer the objective. It all comes down to finding anything and everything to talk about just for the sake of views and creating content. It is what it is. A lot of people are gullible and can't see past the games and the gimmicks. They get swallowed up in the deceptive tactics and they begin to develop an affinity for some of the fakers, almost to the point where they begin to believe everything they say. But then there's a lot of people who eventually come to see it for what it is. And that's when these channels eventually disappear. I've seen them come and go, a lot of them. unfortunately, everybody just ain't that stupid. It's easy to create these facades when there's nobody to refute the information. That's one of the things about YouTube that can be a good or a bad thing. You can be whoever you want to be. It creates monsters to the point that some of these clowns begin to think that they become modern day celebrities. Come on, people, wake up. It's not a secret that all channels in the prison genre that talk about gangs, criminal organizations, politics, and the internal workings are channels that are basically considered to be channels that are spreading poison because they're giving up the blueprints. If you're active and you're truly living by those standards, then you know that it's a no-no to talk about certain things, politics, gang business, and the internal workings, period. This can't be compromised or manipulated. When I was active, if I would have watched any one of these prison channels on YouTube, including mine, I would have been like, damn man, these dudes are degenerates. They're giving up all the blueprints and they're exposing the game. You can't have it both ways and split hairs. Otherwise, you're in the wrong business. This is why I've always been completely transparent and forthright about who I am, what I've done, and what my purpose is on YouTube. And I haven't changed. Not everyone can say that, and that's just a fact. Some people just can't bring themselves to be completely honest about their past. They'll look you dead in the eyes and tell you that they never cooperated, that they didn't go out like that, and they'll do and say whatever they need to in order to lead you to believe that there is still a stand-up guy. They'll keep these skeletons deep in the closet, and they'll even refer to other people as snitches as just another way to insulate and put more distance between themselves and those who are supposed to be despised. It's comical, man. But I'll tell you what it is. It's all about the stigmas and the implications that come with someone who has cooperated. That's what they're running from. That's what they don't want to be associated with. There's a lot of people who are able to see past it because they understand the treachery, the backstabbing, and the betrayal that's really involved in that lifestyle. And they'll tell you, I don't blame you, I would have done the same thing. But then there's that other element who refuses to understand it at any juncture. They live by the code, and there's nothing that can ever justify ever crossing that line. I understand both of these perspectives because on one hand, I honored that belief system for almost 40 years. And then on the other hand, I've been on the other side of it too. You can't drink the Kool-Aid and then try to claim you're still a stand-up guy who then cherry picks what part of the gangster code you want people to believe you're still honoring. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but these rules can't be changed. There is no gray area here. It's either black or white. If you're really about trying to help people and your message is really about helping the younger generation that's headed for self-destruction, then keep it real and take off the camouflage. Is it really about deglorification of the gang lifestyle, or is it about proving that you never cooperated? When someone places a lot of emphasis in trying to cover up their tracks and be perceived in a certain light, then that should tell you right there, where there's smoke, there's always fire. As far as what happens to people who slap jackets on other people and call them informants, it depends. Sometimes it depends on who you are, who you know, and how much influence you have. It's sad, but it's true. Dirty cutthroat politics. If you have a lot of influence and you're someone who has an agenda, such as trying to silence someone or get them out of the way, you're in trouble. The perfect example is what Kwete did to Lizard. He knew he had critical information that could sink and destroy him, so he used cutthroat tactics to push an agenda. And look at the devastation, the far-reaching consequences, and the type of self-destruction this caused. It resulted in Operation Black Widow, 5 years of law enforcement scrutiny, 22 convictions, 2 who originally faced the death penalty, 73 offshoot cases that resulted in another 57 convictions, 89 defections, several murders occurred, NF leadership was taken out of California and commuted to the federal prison system, which then led to a domino effect. State and federal split, Operation Quiet Storm, and the shameful and disgraceful removal of Tibbs. So Mike Martinez wants to know, so after Kung Fu got whacked, what became of Tweety? As far as I know, Tweety's still active. Don't quote me on that though. I never heard anything about him being deemed no good behind this. But like I said, things could have changed since then too. Wicked, the main individual who had an issue with him and who was trying to get him crossed up, ended up cooperating in that last indictment in San Jose. So that might have actually helped him. So Garrett Johnson wants to know, in your book, you say how Benito Chavez got released in 2001 and managed to fall off the face of the earth somehow. Have you still never heard anything about him? If this is you, Weddle, don't trip. I haven't heard anything about them looking for you, brother. I'm kidding, Garrett. I had to say that. But this is true. Benito Chavez from San Francisco did in fact disappear, and he did fall off the face of the earth. I was with him in C6 in Pelican Bay back in 2001, and he paroled about 2 months before me. We were both supposed to link up and work together on the streets, but he fell off the map. Weddle had been down for a minute, and he was in good standings when he paroled. But he was getting up there in age, and I personally think he just got out and came to the realization that this isn't how he wanted to spend the last 10 or 20 years of his life. So Kane Ma wants to know, how did Tweety meet Bird? Any foreknowledge on Tweety's relation to Fu by Wicked, YB's part before they hit house? Did the cease and desist order apply to YB? Any bad blood between YB and Fu before the order was given? Can you clarify how the federal branch is stronger than state and how that strength is utilized by its members? Was there any support given to Fu from federal branch after he was ordered down by Wicked? God damn. Tweety's been in the mix for a while now, at least as far back as 2004 when I was running a regiment out there in San Jose. So it's really not a surprise that he knows Bird or some of the others who were functioning on the streets. The only foreknowledge that Tweety and Kung Fu had is what I said about Kung Fu having kids with Tweety's girl. I believe Kung Fu had either 2 or 3 kids with her, and because of this, they had always maintained somewhat of a cordial relationship. With respects to the cease and desist order, it applied to both YB and Kung Fu, but I think it was more directed at Kung Fu. YB's not the smartest guy on the team, trust me on that. Both him and his brother Sykes were working in my regiment out there, and I'm sure other people including Wicked knew this as well. The other thing about YB that I've always took notice of when it's come to him is the fact that he's always been given a lot of latitude and leeway because of his brother and because he uses Sykes as leverage. I myself am guilty of this because YB did a lot of dumb shit out there. Shit that technically should have got him deemed. But I always gave him the benefit of the doubt because of Sykes. And Sykes was the only reason I didn't drop the hammer on him. You asked if there was any bad blood between YB and Kung Fu. I'm not aware of any conflicts or nothing that put them two at odds. But then again, I wasn't out there during this time either, so it's possible something might have or could have happened. As far as the last 2 parts of your question, I'm not aware of any support that Kung Fu might have gotten from the federal branch. But just based on the fact that Bird is and always has been tightly plugged into the federal branch, I'd be more inclined to believe that they were all on the same page. The final thing you asked about is clarification insofar as how the federal branch is stronger than the state and how this strength is utilized by its members. For one, off the top, the federal branch has longevity and experience on their side. Most of those brothers have worked together as a team and have dealt with a lot of adversity over the years. Not just with the legal adversities like indictments and things like that, but also with the internal adversities and the struggles that they've had to overcome. They have a little bit over 20 solid years together, and they've seen it all. Everything from other fellow leaders defecting to internal rifts like D facility and the dilemmas that were created from stripping the NR, down to all the restructuring and recreating that came from Operation Black Widow. So this in itself makes them a lot stronger as they've had to struggle together. Like I said, the other part of it is experience. Experience is valuable. This helps you rebound and create contingencies a lot more fluidly when you've been down those roads before. These brothers that composed the state leadership had some experience as well, but nothing even close to the federal branch. I know them all and I've been around them all, so it's easier for me to gauge these things. I can tell you now that when it comes to DC, Conejo, Puppet, Chuco, and Esteban, I'd definitely rather have C's like Corny, Pinky, Tibbs, Skip, and Mad Dog on my team. It's a no-brainer. They're stronger, and when it comes to these strengths and how they've been utilized by the members, they've utilized it by applying it to and from everything like recruitment, building up the organization, asserting their influence, and by continuing to evolve and grow as a criminal organization. Some of these guys are the actual architects and the creators of the newly revised NF Constitution, the NR bonds format, and they just helped reshape the ideals and the NF philosophy that dictated the course over the last few decades. Those aren't small feats by any means. It hasn't always been perfect. There's always going to be some level of corruption, and everybody ain't always going to be marching to the same beat. But you can't take nothing away that these guys have done either. So Valley Raiders 56 wants to know, do you know why there are no more regiments in Stockton? Is it because RICO cases that happened to Mad Dog? Some of it's by coincidence, some of it's because of the legal setbacks that Mad Dog went through, and some of it is just based on the lack of NF members paroling back to the Stockton area. I can tell you for a fact that Mad Dog had huge plans and huge aspirations to go back out there and reestablish Stockton. This is something that was being planned as far back as 2003, 2004 when I was out there. I was part of the leadership at that time and was gearing up for him to get out. But then he got hit with those 2 RICO cases and it set everything back. Since then, there really hasn't been any C's from the Stockton area that have gotten out and who have had the drive or experience to break ground out there. Seriously, think about it. What C's from Stockton have paroled to that area, and who was the last one that ran a regiment out there? I mean, there's been a few individuals who paroled to Stockton and some of the smaller neighboring cities around Stockton, and they ran small crews who generated small amounts of money, but it wasn't on a level that you could even call these regiments. That's why I call them crews. It was the same way for me when I paroled to San Francisco back in 1992, 1993. I really had no seasoning or hands-on experience when it came to running or establishing street regiments. I wasn't able to get nothing off the ground until later after I was gamed up and had acquired more training on this. Happy was probably the closest thing to get back out from that area, Lodi, and even then he didn't parole out there. He paroled to Oakland. I don't think it was by choice. I think parole mandated it because they didn't want him back out there in Lodi. But that's why I said some of it has been coincidence or things that were beyond the NF's control. This will eventually change. There's a lot of solid homeboys out there and Stockton's ripe for breaking ground. But it's just going to be a matter of having the right individual parole to that area. And you wonder why Northern California has had a history of other criminal organizations moving in and taking advantage of the money-making ventures out there. As big as Stockton is, and as many Norteños that there is out there, and there hasn't been a regiment established in years. All it takes is for one C who's serious about establishing that whole area, but it just hasn't happened yet. So CUSP, RDR Nation wants to know, listening to a lot of these stories on YouTube, it's obvious that some people are getting their information from law enforcement. If you just pay attention and listen, there's certain things that are said that are slip-ups. This isn't information that you can just get from reading police reports. It's information that sounds like it's coming from investigative officers. What's your take on this? That's a good question. You're one of the smart ones that obviously pays close attention to the things you hear. This guy knows the intimate details that has never before been released in any police reports or at any trials because the defendant pleads guilty and avoids trial. Someone reveals the intimate details after the case is adjudicated. This is obvious. It can't be first-hand information because they weren't there. So there's only one place this information could have come from. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. You basically figured it out yourself. As far as my take on it, to each his own. If this is how people get their information, that's on them. I personally don't have to reach out to other people for that type of information because I've done enough and been involved in enough shit myself to tell my own stories. Sometimes I'll do research about cases and then recite what I read, but I don't do it as if I had first-hand information or as if I was there myself. I think as long as they're honest about where they're getting the information, no harm, no foul. If they lie about it and act like they were a part of it and as if they were in the know, then I don't respect it. You shouldn't have to give off false impressions or lie to the viewers that are supporting you. But some people don't care and just want to hear good stories. So at the end of the day, I guess it really don't matter. So Little Yak 1 Zoe wants to know, Boxer, did you hear Sundown comment on your book? What did you think about his book? Do you know him personally? And is it true he's an NF legend and hitman? Yeah, I heard the comment. No, actually, somebody else told me about it and I found the comment. Hey, to each his own. Not everybody's gonna like it. He hasn't been the first to say it, and he definitely won't be the last. I've heard other people make similar comments and critique it as well, but considering where it's coming from and what's said, it carries no weight. When it comes to critiquing my book, I let numbers on Amazon speak for themselves, and my book's been holding its own. When you pull it up, it's at the top, the first in its genre. I think ranking 490 in all the criminal biographies compared to 42,674 are telling numbers. But if you dropped out in 5th grade, it's probably not for you. The big words will go right over your head and you'll lose interest in it because you won't understand it. Both books can be found on Amazon, but his isn't even in the genre. I think you got to go to the religious genre to even find it. What did I think about his book? Come on, man, you already know. You trying to stir the pot. I'll just say this, like he said, it's nothing personal against him, but his book wasn't exactly a #1 bestseller either. Didn't finish it, didn't like it, didn't hold my interest, and let's just say it was something a little different from what I was expecting. So I got refunded. Self-glorification turns me down. I lose interest quick. As far as whether or not I know him, never met him, never heard of the guy. Never heard nothing about him. As far as whether or not I think he's a legend or an NF hitman, come on, man. I'm not even going to speak on that. Legend? Whether you like them or not, legends are your Bobo Sosas, your Death Row Joes, guys like Mikeo, Brown Bob, Black Bob. Those are your legends that are worthy of being spoken of when you talk about the history. You can't be a legend if your name never even comes up in the history. Come on, people. You guys are smarter than this. This is another word that's used too freely. That's all I'm going to say on that. It's a good marketing tool, though. It's a good way to get people's attention. So 530 wants to know, blows my mind how long the NF has survived in GP with such small numbers, and how the ones that stand are willing to literally die for the end. Unfortunately, this gives kids in poor neighborhoods a Robin Hood type of story, and then they join the gang. Yeah, that's always been one of the NF's biggest points of propaganda. How it's always overcome its obstacles, even in light of the fact that it's always been a smaller organization that's faced bigger criminal organizations like the Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood. The NF and its following have always prided itself with being a minority and how it's always favored quality over quantity. I never really looked at it like a Robin Hood type of story that might inspire impoverished kids growing up in the hood to join. But I guess having that underdog effect might actually influence the younger generation to get hooked up. The other thing you pointed out that's always been another thing the NF has prided itself in is how dedicated some NF members are and the depths they're willing to go to in order to honor that commitment. Standing tall and being a true guerrero in times of battle is something most NF members have always taken serious. The same thing can be said about Imeros and ABs. They've proven that they're willing to stand and die for what they believe in as well. This is just part of proving your mettle and fortitude. But when it comes down to pound for pound and considering what the NF has had the ability to overcome, it's definitely held its own. This is a testament of how strong the NF propaganda machine is and how successful it's been at selling its agenda. In closing, I just want to make something abundantly clear. It's not my purpose to glorify or slander the NF. This isn't my objective when it comes to any of the criminal organizations that I've ever talked about. If you want to be a gang member or if you want to dedicate your life to a cause that's represented by any one of these criminal organizations that I've talked about, that's your choice. You're the one who has to live with these choices and endure the consequences that comes with that. My only purpose is this. I've been a part of that lifestyle. I lived it, breathed it, walked it, and talked it for well over 30 plus years. I'm simply sharing this information, my experiences, and the things I've been through so that you have all the information and so that you're no longer blind as to what it really entails. What you do with this information is your choice and your choice alone. If you decide that this is inspiring to you, that this might be something that you want to commit yourself to and that you don't mind an early grave or spending the rest of your life in prison, then more power to you. Like I said, I feel like I'm doing my part and I'm accomplishing my goal by sharing this information with you. I'm not an anti-gang activist that's trying to talk people out of joining gangs. That's not my thing. Nor do I embellish, fabricate, or exaggerate the things I tell you. These are choices you have to make. If you ask me questions, I'll always answer truthfully and to the best of my ability. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Q&A. I'm going to start working on another one next week. So if you have more questions, get them in now. I'm also working on 2 more short profiles that I'm hoping to finish by the middle of next week, so be looking for those as well. As always, we want to emphatically thank you all for continuing to support us and for just sticking with us. Like I said last week, we're looking forward to spending another year with you guys in 2022, and we have a lot of good things planned. Also, don't forget about the milestone that we need your support with, reaching 20,000 subs by the end of the year. It's important to us here at Paradigm Media News, as it just validates that we're growing as a channel and that people are embracing what we do. We don't have that much time left to make it, and I'll honestly be surprised if we do. But getting closer will still put us closer to reaching that milestone. As we all get ready for these upcoming holidays, here's some food for thought. Continue to stay positive out there, and just remember, life's too short. Consider forgiving someone you haven't. Be thankful for all the things you have, and value those loved ones who are in your life, as tomorrow's never guaranteed.